Good Friday, everyone. Welcome to the VolQuest.com Blue Water Climate Control Podcast. Glad to have you along on this Friday with Rob Lewis, Austin Price, Jesse Simonton. I'm Brent Hubbs. Kind of a unique perspective we're going to take here when you look at reviewing the game. Jesse, kind of going to do a little bit of a takeoff on your Sunday review piece, but it's kind of a review of the game 6-8 months later. And today we'll start with Georgia State. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a game every week, reviewing the season. But we're not going to do like play-by-play of the entire game. We're going to review it from the standpoint of what we learned upon rewatch and then kind of how it spins forward into the 2020 season, provided that we're playing football in 2020. So today we're going to start with the Georgia State game. Obviously, a huge disappointment for Tennessee, a shock to the world in that game as Tennessee loses 38-30 to Georgia State. And Jesse, I'll start with you. Upon rewatch, give me your biggest overall takeaway, just kind of the maybe the theme of the deal, not necessarily a specific deal, but give me your theme of the overall takeaway.
Well, I think, this is the third time I've watched this game now. So first live and then rewatching it, that Sunday for my piece, and now going back over it for a third time. The fact that Tennessee finished with more yards, had fewer penalties, only punted once, efficient on third down, and led in all four quarters at some point in the game, yet basically effectively lost by 2 touchdowns, if not for a touchdown that happened with 1 second on the clock, was because they just Yosemite Sam themselves throughout the game. And it was so many mistakes, whether it was Jarrett Garantano turning the ball over, the kind of Chinese fire drill that kept happening on the offensive line, which I think that's one of the things that we can talk about in terms of projecting forward. Who was Tennessee's best 5 guys going to be? Because they did not go into this game knowing they cross-trained the whole fall, and that proved problematic. The problem is how many times do we see, Rob, guys just look totally confused out there, and they didn't so much get blown off the ball against Georgia State, but the fundamentals were bad, the gap assignment was bad, which then leads to who's going to be the inside linebacker next to Toa Toa. Toa Toa kind of flashed in this game. We saw his immense talents that he was able to prove the rest of the season. But it was kind of a trial by fire that they did next to him with no Daniel Batuli. And that's going to be the same thing we're looking at this fall.
Yeah, I mean, how many times has it come up on the General's quarters, what kind of difference would Batuli have made in those first 2 games? And that's something that certainly jumped out at me on the rewatch was just, missed tackles, not setting the edge. Georgia State just kept themselves on schedule in terms of down and distance so many times. I mean, they were 10-17 on third down, and it wasn't like Ellington was converting a lot of 3rd and 8s. I mean, it was 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1. They went for it twice and got it on 4th down, short conversions. Just to me, just the way they were able to control the ball really stood out, and especially in the fourth quarter, just kind of a couple of dominant drives to seal the game. And yeah, I mean, Tennessee shot themselves in the foot with turnovers. Jarrett had a bad fumble. That first play of the game, or I think it was the first play of the game, the interception.
Second play of the game, yeah.
Second play, the backwards pass. I mean, that just really kind of set the tone for the whole afternoon. And I mean, it was bad watching it live. It was, maybe even worse to see how, Georgia State just got confidence as the game went on. And you could tell when they came out in the third quarter, they're like, hey, we can win this game. And I mean, just really control the way they controlled the fourth quarter. I knew it, but I haven't seen it the first time. But that just really stood out. I mean, because Tennessee, I mean, as you said in the opener, Brent, they led all 4 quarters. Had a lead in the second half and just completely, shot themselves in the foot and let Georgia State just take control of the game.
Jesse, I thought upon rewatching it, and I think they definitely missed Daniel Batuli. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But in rewatching it, I thought the defensive line got shoved around pretty good. I mean, I thought that, you mentioned their gap responsibilities, but I thought there were times where Georgia State kind of, maybe they didn't get 5 or 6 yards, but they really kind of moved the line of scrimmage, 2, 3, 4 yards, giving them a chance in the run game. It says a lot about how much that group improved, but I thought they were as bad up front as they missed Daniel Batuli in the front 7.
That's fair. I will say this because I brought this up in my review piece the day later, and it was even more evident kind of rewatching it for a third time and having that kind of in the background. How many times did you see plays where basically the box was 8 versus 6?
Yeah.
Where Tennessee was just completely outmanned there. And so that actually leads me to another big picture thought rewatching this game. I think of all the games in the 2019 season for Tennessee, this is the one where the coaching staff let the team down more than the players. What happened down in Gainesville, I think we can kind of, when we get to that game, I think that was just kind of a no-show by a lot of guys. But this was just a really bad game, in my opinion, from the staff. They didn't call Pruitt didn't call timeout when Deandre Johnson's running on the field. How many times did we see the 8 versus 6? They didn't call a timeout when Tennessee's got 3 defensive linemen, way on the formation over to the right side, the play that got memed to death, that very week. Ty Chandler, if there's issues with his ball security, why do you let him return the first kickoff of the second half, but then never give him a touch? So again, I thought the things that they did with the offensive line were just particularly strange. This game was more on the staff than probably any of the other losses in 2019, in my opinion.
Rob, doesn't it feel like in rewatching it that Tennessee was, I don't want to say grasping at straws, but they were so unsettled at so many positions, which is why they were rotating so many bodies that they never really got any continuity going, particularly in that game. And I thought it affected them the first couple of games of the season.
I agree. I mean, you look at Jared was under pressure, all game long. 4 sacks. That was huge. Had the fumble in the fourth quarter. That was kind of a game changer. And just, a couple of nice runs, but golly, finished with less than 100 yards rushing against, Georgia State. That's just an SEC team playing that caliber of opponent. That's, we second guessed it at the time, not just us, but everybody. And Jesse mentioned it already, the cross training that went on. In hindsight, being 2020, I think that was a real, just something that came up and bit them in this game where, I think they probably thought that they, we're going to, I don't know if it's right to say that we're going to line up and be able to move them just because of, it's a lower classification school. But that just wasn't the case. Georgia State was better in the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball.
Austin, when you look at the game and you review this game across the board, to me, it's about line of scrimmage. And there were some other things, but where Tennessee, it shows how much they improved throughout the season because they got better in the line of scrimmage, but they were really rough at the first part of this game in the line of scrimmage.
Well, up front, I think Tennessee, going in, you had a lot of defensive linemen that, were just really inexperienced. And then, when you throw in, the Marcus Tatums and those type of guys on offense, but to me, it's not just the line of scrimmage. It's also, the Shannon Reeds, Will Ignots. You just had guys that, to me, probably just aren't set, for this level or did not have enough experience at the time for this level to be, really, really, I know it's Georgia State. It shouldn't matter, but at the same time, Georgia State was hungry. Tennessee came out, I thought, and thought they were just going to go through the motions. And obviously, from basically that second play on, they had a few flashes, but not enough.
I thought Dan Ellington, the quarterback for Georgia State, probably didn't get enough credit. I didn't think he was going into the game, I didn't think he was very good. And he, was going to be a very good passer. He wasn't great, but when you went back and watched the game, the way he handled the ball, read the zone reads and everything else, I thought Dan Ellington was really good in this game for Georgia State. I think he deserves credit, and obviously the blame, and we were talking about Tennessee, but I thought Ellington was really good.
Yeah, he threw it on the move really well, Jesse. You go back and rewatch it, and the commentators commented on it a couple of different times. When he was able to, avoid what little bit of pass rush that was there and kind of move the pocket a little bit, he was very accurate. And I thought, really, really, was able to, again, not a huge difference maker, but a guy that, moved the chains when need to be. And then the second half, was just I thought super solid in his ability to, extend drives and get his team back in the red area and score points.
Yeah, I mean, Ellington was only 11 for 24, but I think your point of when he needed to make a throw, he made it. And this was a game where, again, Tennessee missed a guy that wasn't there and wasn't available. And so Bryce Thompson suspended, so Warren Burrell has to start. And Warren Burrell got picked on a lot in this game.
Good point.
And, where's Warren Burrell going to be in year 2 in this scheme? He clearly looked, was probably thrown into the fire too early last season. The first 3 weeks of the season, he really did struggle. He makes his first career start here. They pick on him immediately. Again, what's going to happen at safety? I think that's a big concern. One of my takeaways from this game, upon another rewatch, Trayvon Flowers really struggled in this game, and whether it was taking bad lanes or probably more importantly, because everyone talks, and Jeremy and Derek are really big believers in Trayvon's
ball skills,
ball skills, ability to kind of come up with interceptions and stuff, but you also got to be able to shed blockers. And he got just stuck in the tunnel or thrown out of the play way too often. And for a safety, that cannot happen. So that's kind of something to kind of watch going forward. One final thought from me, just kind of on the offensive and defensive lines. This is the game, though, where I think it is going to get something out of Darrell Middleton, because he did flash a little bit. Same for Greg Emerson. On the other side, and this is why I think you can really spin it forward, we all agree that this is kind of a make or break year for Jameer Johnson. And who knows, they could be a make or break week for Jameer Johnson. I mean, we don't know, with as enigmatic as he is, but he probably was Tennessee's best offensive lineman in this game. That's the only game you could say that. But he, both on the eye test and even when you go back and kind of look at some of the PFF stuff, he was solid. And with the uncertainty, about is health wise with some of these guys, can he kind of create a lane for himself? I think that's something to kind of, at least remember that he is still on this football team and could become a factor if he can play like he did in this one game.
Brent talked about this. I remember at the time, probably about week 3, week 4, but Tennessee goes down. They score their opening touchdown of the year on that jump ball to Marquez Callaway, and then it was like they forgot that he could go do those things.
The fade, yeah.
for like 3 or 4 weeks, and so you go back to watch that. Then you also watch some of the little mistakes that Jarrett made in that game that were kind of a precursor of games to come, like what easily could have been an interception there right before the half, and
of course that's one of the worst throws he's ever made.
Yeah, correct. And, it just, again, the little things like that were just kind of, to me, a precursor of what was to come the next, 4 or 5 weeks until things kind of got settled down and Tennessee found its rhythm on both sides of the ball. Even though they were, never really super consistent on offense. One week they'd throw for 400 and the next week they'd throw for 78. They still found, a playmaking ability throughout the course of the season. But in this game, to me, there were just little things that, kind of highlighted, what was to come the next, month or so.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that, AP.
Well, I think too, Jesse, and I wrote about this, 6-8 weeks ago. But Tennessee, this was an example of the start of the red zone struggles that Tennessee had all season long. And I think if you're Jim Chaney and you're looking and working on your offense for the fall, your red zone package last year should have been slant to Juwan Jennings, fade to Callaway, were really your 2 throws in the red zone, because Jennings could beat somebody inside on the slant most every time, and Callaway high pointed the ball better than anything. They didn't live on that. So as you look forward without those 2 guys, what is their red zone answer when the field gets shrunk down this year? How do they win in the red zone with this team? Because I don't think the red zone package last year was good enough. So what does it look like this year? I think is a question mark coming out of this, because I don't think they played to their strengths in the red zone, and it started in the Georgia State game personally.
Yeah, and the other thing that started in the drive, I agree. You wrote about it 6 weeks ago, and we followed it, throughout the season last season. Looking at some of the other notes I have here just about JG. AP talking about a precursor of things to come. Jarrett was really risk averse in 2018. Limited his mistakes. He would take some sacks, obviously some ill-advised sacks, but he wasn't throwing the ball into traffic. And more importantly, he seemed to at least have more sight adjustments 2 years ago than he did last season. One thing that just completely stands out in this game that then happens basically for the next 4 or 5 weeks or 3 weeks until he gets benched is he pretty much only went with his first read. And that, the terrible interception to Dominique Wood-Anderson, I think probably the play of the game in terms of what it did to stunt Tennessee's momentum. They get the sack fumble, they get the big play to DWA, and then on 3rd and 3rd and short, he throws it short of the sticks to Austin Pope, who gets tackled effectively behind the line of scrimmage short when Callaway's wide open on a 7-yard dig if he had just gone to his progression. That's something I think we all agree JG's got to be better on. If he's a 5th-year senior, 2nd year in the system with Jim Chaney, he's not going to have the luxury of being able to just, toss it up to Juwan over the middle when things break down, or throw a back shoulder fade to Callaway. His ability to kind of read through the progressions and kind of have the sight adjustments. He did not do this in this game, and it was, again, a precursor for the next couple of weeks in terms of his turnovers. How he adjusts, that in 2020 is going to be, I think, very noteworthy early in the season.
Yeah, to me, it was also like, it was not just JG on the precursor. I mean, it was little things like, you think about it, you go late in the game, Eric Gray just gets obliterated off the edge and gives up that sack.
Protection was terrible in this game.
But I mean, then all of a sudden, that's when Gray kind of fell out of favors because he could not, they could not depend on him in pass protection. So, I mean, little things like that. Obviously, the defensive lapses. You guys talked about Batuli. I mean, him not being there. I mean, does it make a difference? Probably. Who knows? Though. I mean, you can't have revisionist history on that kind of thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, Tennessee just wasn't super deep then, and is not super deep now at that same position. So I mean, and in fact, to me, you're probably a little thinner just based off of you knew Batuli had experience. Now you may have some talent there with some guys coming in. If Q moves over once he gets healthy, coming out of this summer. But there's not any experience there like you had with Batuli.
Well, but because you're right, AP, because you didn't have that experience there, you may have some talent, but you're also losing a month of work with that talent. Crouch was going to be out anyway, but you're even losing some of the the mental stuff with him right now to help get him ready. So how ready are you? An opener with a guy playing in that new position, whether it's Crouch or even J.J. Peterson or whoever, that's going to be obviously a big question mark come fall camp when you look at this team. There's lots of question marks, but as it was magnified in rewatching this Georgia State game, inability to line guys up, make the right checks, reads, things like that. That question about the other inside linebacker spot is magnified for this season because of what we saw at the start of last season.
And the one of the wild cards that you saw in this game that's still kind of out there that I think we get asked about once every 3 or 4 weeks is Jeremy Banks. Banks played 15 some odd snaps in this game, and he showed the good and bad of his athletic ability at that position. He drilled Ellington on an inside blitz where he was able to avoid a guard and get right in there. And then he was also responsible for not reading the play fake correctly down in the red zone and gave up a touchdown. But if 33 is back in the mix, does he, suddenly become a number or somebody else that's kind of a possibility as a potential answer playing alongside Toa Toa?
Yeah, I think that's a huge question. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, I agree. You go back. I mean, that was, I think, the one play you're talking about, Jesse, is where he stood up and talked trash and he was down 15. But yeah, I mean, but I mean, you're right. I mean, not a ton of experience, but experience in the system. That to me, that gives, a guy like Jeremy Banks maybe a leg up over any of those potential inside backers like a Bryson Easton or whoever come the fall if he is back, because he's at least been through several practices at the position at the college level, has played a couple of games at the college level. Now, granted, it's a very small sample size, a very minute amount to look at. But to me, it does give him, if he's in shape, and one would think he probably still is, a chance, to come back in and be a factor if they were to grant him access to the team.
Before the quarantine, he's been working out at the downtown Y. So I've seen him squatting pretty good.
The other thing that jumped Jesse Simon was some inside knowledge at the Y. Another thing that jumped out to me too is he's not a dynamic guy, but he just kind of seems to show up. And he showed up game 1. He showed up in game 13 for this team. Kevon Bennet is not a bad football player. He's not a great football player. I'm not saying that he's a dominant football player, but this is a guy that he just kind of shows up and makes enough plays, and he's solid enough that, he's got to be huge for Tennessee. He's not Darrell Taylor, but I do think you're at least solidified on that side because he made plays, enough plays all season long to tell you he could play going back to this Georgia State game. Mentally as sound as anybody at that side.
He plays with a higher motor than Darrell Taylor, I think. He's not as talented as DT, but he does. I mean, Kevon runs to the football every single play. And I agree. I mean, he was on the 5 guys I had in terms of players who stood out here. The question is, what happened here? What are they going to do opposite of him? Because I think they're pretty confident that Kevon can kind of be that go-to guy. But Deandre Johnson was up and down in this game. He had the huge hustle force fumble. But he also was one of the guys that was very poor in terms of gap control, in terms of kind of containing the edge on the outside. Obviously, whether it was his fault or the coach's fault, he runs on the field late for the what ultimately was one of the go-ahead touchdowns there. So the position opposite of Bennett remains one of the biggest question marks for this football team entering 2020.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. The other thing that stood out to me back to the offense side, and I know Eric Gray was not, he struggled in pass protection, but it's hard to look at that and look at him in this game and wonder why he disappeared to the degree he disappeared, because he was good in this game as a runner and as a guy catching the ball out of the backfield. Pass protection, no question. But I thought all the backs were poor in pass protection. A little bit surprised that he disappeared for the long stretch that he disappeared in during the season. But going back and watching the replay of it.
Right. Well, it's just, and that's going to be especially apparent after next week when we rewatch the BYU game where he, gets 15 some odd carries and is really good. His effectiveness I will say this, for whatever reason, and I think, I think the running back, this is a good conversation to also kind of spin it forward. Eric's effectiveness seemed to lose its luster as the season went on, really up until the Vanderbilt game, because he just wasn't breaking tackles. Those spin moves and some of that stuff just wasn't really working. But this was also a game, guys, where it was Ty Chandler in a nutshell, where he just kind of leaves you wanting more. He flashes a little bit, but there's too many mistakes. I think that him needing to kind of work on his hands, I think, is a big focus for this offseason. But the running back spot, I mean, it's pretty clear when you watch this game. Eric Gray has something. There is some juice to him. And it's a real surprise they couldn't figure out how to kind of get him involved better in that middle stretch. But then, he came on like gangbusters kind of in the season.
Yeah, it certainly did. A couple other things to get to in this game on this podcast. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about Blue Water Climate Control and their smooth sailing service plan. Blue Water offers their clients seasonal inspections, repair discounts, and annual tune-ups for one low annual price or a low automatic monthly payments. The smooth sailing service plan includes semi-automatic or semi-annual seasonal inspections to perform routine checks, 10% off parts and labor on all HVAC repairs, an annual 40-point diagnostic inspection that includes your ductwork, prioritized response to air conditioning repair and maintenance needs, never pay overtime fees for those weekend and after-hour emergencies, and they have a loyalty plan as well. So call and get more on their smooth sailing service plan. Call them up at 865-299-2290. That's 865-299-2290. Don't forget to mention volquest.com. Rob, we're talking, we've been talking about a lot of different things, Eric Gray being one of these. I think the other thing that jumps out about this game, when you look at it moving forward for Tennessee, there is some comfort heading into this season with the fact that they're going to be settled up front on their defensive and offensive lines, because the musical chairs, if you will, with the offensive line really affected this team. With what's going to be no spring practice, a shortened summer, the fact that what you're like on the offensive line for the most part should help this team a great deal heading into this season.
I mean, I think that's without question, what you feel the best about if you're Tennessee right now is the line of scrimmage. Opened up last year, huge question marks on the defensive line, and we talked about it. And that certainly showed up in week one. But, I mean, it got better and better as the year went on. And, I mean, just contrast what happened in that fourth quarter against Georgia State when Georgia State took it to them, ran the ball when they had to, picked up short yardage, with ease, and then go look at what happened in November against Kentucky. I mean, it's night and day. And if you're Tennessee, and I'll throw Missouri in there too. I mean, got to stop when they had to have it. I mean, to win the game on the road, and that kind of progress. I mean, defensively specifically was, I think one of the best parts about the whole year when you saw. I mean, the pass rush got better, the ability to come up with stops when you needed it got better, and as we've talked about a lot, you bring every piece of that back in the trenches. I mean, certainly you're going to miss Darrell Taylor, you're going to miss Daniel Batuli. But you've got a lot of answers there heading into this season where last year you had tons of question marks.
And you had Emmett Gooden back, not to mention a nice core group of freshman defensive linemen as well. So I agree with Rob. I think defensively there's a lot that can, none of this is ideal, missing all these practices and all this and potential for summer and who knows what else after that. But, this team, because of the experience at the line of scrimmage, may afford itself a little wiggle room as some of those younger skill guys, whether it be receivers or linebackers, come along. Not to mention that, but also that offensive line, especially if Cade wins his appeal, to add Cade, Trey, and then Brandon Kennedy to that kind of inner side, that guard to guard part across the front, to me would be very, very big, not to mention a bunch of other guys that played a lot of football.
Yeah, but I will say this game showed, and as did BYU, part of the problems of depth is nice, but if you don't know who your best five are up front in terms of offensively, I'm all for rotating a bunch of guys defensively, but Tennessee played 7 combinations in this game. I just pulled up the box score, beyond the box score piece I did. 9 guys played. Carvin played the fewest snaps at 15, Kennedy the most at 72. Trey clearly looked rusty in this game. Wanye played both left tackle and left guard. But with Oklahoma, the second week of the season, I think Tennessee's going to need to figure out whether Cade's in that group, if he gets his appeal, where the two, now rising 5-star sophomores are in the mix. How does Jerome Carvin fit in? There's going to be, I think, a temptation by Will Friend and Jeremy Pruitt to play multiple guys early. And this game in BYU is kind of a red light caution of, well, you better know who your main guys are.
Well, and I think because of the schedule this year with Oklahoma being game 2, I think you're going to experiment less, because I think to a degree they probably felt like they could handle Georgia State and BYU in the line of scrimmage, rotate some guys. I think when you look at the fact you got Oklahoma week 2, you got to get settled quickly. And to their credit, they didn't know how much Trey was going to be able to play. I mean, he didn't even start this game when he went in. Brandon Kennedy's coming off an injury, and then you're dealing with freshmen in Darnell Wright and Wanye Morris. You're just more settled there. You may not know all 5, but probably 4 of those 5 right now, which is different. I would be stunned if they're playing 6 or 7 combinations on the offensive line to open the season this year as they were last year. Last thing for me on this game is something that Coach Pruitt talked about. This team got better at it for the most part. That they weren't very good in the bowl game at it, but when they did figure it out a little bit is when I thought took off. Tennessee's inability in this game, Jesse, to play the middle 10 or the middle 7 or whatever the number the coaches want to do. The last 3-4 minutes of the first half, first 4 or 5 minutes of the second half, Tennessee was awful in this deal. They gave away a touchdown in the red zone, had to settle for a field goal at the end, and then Georgia State opens the second half, pretty dominant against Tennessee and moving the football with some misdirection stuff. Tennessee got better at that throughout the season. I think it magnifies the importance of the middle part of the football game that you've heard so much from Dabo and Jeremy Pruitt and all these other guys throughout the course of this past year.
Yeah, I mean they lost their composure at inopportune times, and it happened in both the first and the second half. And like you said, really outside of the Indiana game, they did a nice job of correcting that kind of post Georgia or post Alabama. Really, when they kind of went on that big run. Just a couple of the quick hitters for me in terms of takeaways from this game. Tennessee, I think, is going to enter 2020 with probably one of the best kickers and most reliable kickers in the country, and it started in this week. No one knew that Samaglia was going to emerge as such a kind of consistent force for the Vols. He goes 3 for 3 in this game, 48-yarder. Distance, had been a big question in terms of kind of consistency with him. That was big. Tennessee special teams as a whole, I think this year are going to be interesting. What happens with the punter now that you lose Joe Doyle? You add a grad transfer. But who's returning kicks? I mean, they just really got nothing in this game. They've got nothing most of the season. So that's going to, I think, be something to kind of, follow kind of as this rewatch unfolds and what do we kind of pick up on?
Yeah, and I think when you look at special teams, they struggled really all season long to make a lot of plays there. So can they generate some plays in the kicking game, in the return game this upcoming season? And as you mentioned, who are possible candidates for that? So this is kind of how this thing's going to go week to week. We're going to look at the game. We're going to rewatch the game. We're going to look at highlights, lowlights from the game, and talk about what it means for this team moving forward, what it meant for this team throughout the rest of the season, last season. So we're going to continue to do this each and every week, talking about the game. So obviously next week we'll jump into BYU. It'll get better as the season goes along because Tennessee won some games. But I do think there are some really important things to review that you can learn from this to keep an eye out for this team coming into this fall. Question marks, areas where this team grew, and how they're going to benefit from that growth moving into the 2020 season. That's going to do it for this review portion or this season review of the Georgia State game on the Blue Water Climate Control VolQuest.com podcast. For Jesse Simonton, Austin Price, and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.